Well, here we are, lesson 15 in leadership at the points of contact. We're, with this lesson, wrapping up the section in which we have covered what I see as one of the key roles that leaders play in organizational settings, and that is to somehow expand and enhance employee engagement. We read and hear a lot these days about the relatively low levels of employee engagement, and the wringing of hands and wailing of gnashing of teeth seems to imply at least that there's nothing we can do about that. And the simple truth of the matter is the quality of leadership is ultimately going to determine how engaged your employees are. And so this approach that I've been espousing for you is based on a pair of fours, let's call it. 4 premises and 4 types of questions. The premises all speak to the relationship between value, more specifically employees' perception of value, and the choices that they make. And they're pretty straightforward in my opinion. They start with a basic assumption, and that is that the only reason employees, or anybody else for that matter, is going to do the things we expect them to do is if they believe they're going to receive sufficient value to justify their doing so. Plain and simple. That's not rocket science. Number 2, every one of these people, employees in this case, have their own somewhat unique definitions of value, and those definitions change, which means understanding their definition of value is not a one-time event. The third premise, or truth, is that the only way you and the other members of your leadership team can possibly know how or even if you can deliver the value they're seeking is by understanding what has value to them. And finally, 4, the only way to be sure you do that is by having them explain what represents value to them. And so it makes perfect sense that instead of talking or telling or ordering, we ask questions, and that's the second in the pair of 4s, the 4 types of questions. The what questions is how we began this process. What questions are where you ask them to list for you the things they want back from your organization in return for the things you ask them to do. Priority questions is where you ask them to rank those things, and clarification questions, the one we covered in our last lesson, is where you ask them to explain their expectations, the one specifically that could be vague or misinterpreted by you. With this lesson, we're getting to the 4th in the series of 4 questions, and I'm telling you, this is where the real power is. These are the why questions. With the why questions, the way we wrap up this process, we're doing some things that are extremely important. First and foremost, we're reinforcing for our employees, and maybe at least as important for us as leaders, that our job is not to motivate them. That we realistically can't be expected to motivate them. Asking these why questions is a means by which we start provoking them to think about what are their motives. Under what circumstances would they be willing to do something? What is it about the things they've said they want back from us that make them so important to them? I'll tell you one more thing before I get into an example of the why questions. You are most definitely breaking new ground when you go here. And what I mean by that, and I know I've said that with some of the other questions, and that's true, but here especially, people are going to need an opportunities to think. So when you ask these why questions, don't get impatient with silence. Don't be too quick to try to offer some suggested answers for employees. Do the same thing I encourage you to do way back with the what and the priority questions. Ask and hush. Ask them the question. So we've asked them the what question. What are some of the things you expect back? Priority, how would you rank them in their order of importance to you? Clarification for the ones that needed clarifying. And finally, we ask them a why question. Go back to the first thing they said, the one that's the most important to them, and ask them something like this. What is it about that? Let's say recognition. What is it about recognition, as you've defined it, that makes it so important to you? What are you asking them for? You're asking them to think and then to share with you the value they associate with having their expectation met. Can you understand that if we had to take this definition of value and break it down into only 2 components, they would be the whats, what they want, and the whys, why those things are important to them, and that dear friends, is where the power is. Don't you dare discontinue this process until you've asked this question. So let's get to the action items to kind of wrap up this section of our program. As we conclude this section of the program, I encourage you and the members of your leadership team to answer the questions before facilitating the process with your employees. Now, doing this is going to help you in at least three ways. First, it'll help you gain a better perspective on the different components in your own definitions of value. Two, it will help you empathize more with employees as they struggle with the process. When you ask them questions, they're going to have to think about it. If you've had to think about it yourself first, you'll have more empathy with their plight. And finally, three, it'll help you come up with some effective ways to solicit this information from your employees. And that takes me to the second and final action item in this section. You and the members of your leadership team, I want you to review the 4 types of questions and the examples I provided, and then I want you to modify those questions to accommodate each of your communication preferences. As I've told you in every one of the lessons so far, particularly at the end of each section, completing these action items is a key to maximizing the learning potential the program has for you. So I really encourage you and the members of your leadership team to work through these action items I've listed. And we will pick up here as we begin our next section with lesson 16.